Hello and welcome to ATARC's 2021 TIC 3.0 Virtual Summit. My name is Kirsten Patton and I am the Working Group Program Manager here at ATARC. ATARC stands for the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center. We are a nonprofit that facilitates collaboration between government, industry, and academia in order to accelerate technology modernization initiatives. We provide ongoing opportunities for cross-agency collaboration through on-site interaction, learning, and market research. I would like to give a special thank you to our partners today over at Palo Alto, and I would also like to thank our amazing panelists for today. We have a fantastic lineup. Additionally, I would also like to thank you all for joining us. Today will be a day full of action-packed panels all surrounding TIC 3.0 in the federal space. Our panel experts will explain the importance behind TIC as well as the solution it is enabling. We will have discussions of navigating the various cloud strategies and the best path forward. Federal subject matter experts will dive into the challenges brought forth with the migration to cloud infrastructure, as well as the solutions that have surfaced to overcome these hurdles, and how they were able to implement the TIC 3.0 guidelines to ensure their cloud journey was secure and effective. We hope that you enjoy this interactive and informative day. Up first, we will be hearing from our keynote speaker, Sean Connolly. Sean is the TIC Program Manager over at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Sean, over to you.
There we go. Hi, Kirsten. Thank you. All right. Thank you, everyone. Glad to be here. My name is Sean Connolly. As Kirsten mentioned, I work at the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. My name is Sean Connolly, and I lead the TIC program at CISA. A little bit on my background, aside for supporting the TIC program since about 2007. Also have supported the CDM and E3A rollout. More recently, I was a co-author on the NIST Special Pub Zero Trust Architectures 800-207. Next slide, please. Let's get right into TIC 3. And so we'll ground our presentation. So TIC is the federal government's primary architectural strategy on how to enhance network security across the federal enterprise, meaning the 100 or so federal, civilian, executive agencies. For the last 10 years, the government's primary protection strategy was towards one large perimeter, a macro perimeter, aka the castle and moat philosophy. I'll explain in a little bit. September 2019, OMB released Memo 1926, update to the TIC initiative. In July of 2020, CISA, in collaboration with a number of our stakeholders and partners, released the core TIC 3 documentation. There are three themes in the updated guidance. We offer a new security strategy, allowing agencies to explore new opportunities for redefinition of their perimeter. Flexible architectures allows for that castle and moat strategy that most of us are familiar with, and we'll explore in a few slides. Allows for alternatives architectures to define the agency's boundaries and perimeters. And visibility, situational awareness mission, both for the agency and CISA. We'll understand that shift from TIC 1 and TIC 2, from securing a single network boundary to where we are at TIC 3, allowing for distributed secure architecture with new security strategy, new flexibility, and new visibility is the most fundamental change in the guidance. Next slide, please. So the TIC 3 core guidance. There are 5 documents that make up the core scaffolding of the TIC 3 guidance: the program guidebook, reference architecture, security capabilities catalog, and the use case and overlay handbooks. The documents can be grouped into 2 sets. The first is the guidebook and the reference architecture. We consider those to be strategic and programmatic. Then capabilities catalog, the use cases themselves, and the overlays. Those we look at to be more operational or tactical. The guidance is additive. We suggest readers to start with the program guidebook and end with the overlays when reviewing the guidance to get the most comprehensive understanding of the new program. Next slide, please. So we begin. Oops, sorry about that. And there's a web page where we can get the guidance. Security. Next slide. There you go. We will begin by focusing on the first theme in the guidance: security. TIC 3 is positioned to help agencies accelerate their IT modernization plans. On the right side are some of the common themes that we hear from agencies, vendors, and the greater IT community on TIC. Trust zones, new concept in TIC 3 that we'll talk about in a moment. Zero trust, that continual establishment and reestablishment of trust. And Sassy and edge computing, the secure access service edge, popularized by Gartner. We'll explore more of these over the next half hour, the next 20 minutes, sorry. Next slide. Protecting networks with trust zones. One of the items we introduced in the new guidance is the concept of trust zones. Trust zone is a logical boundary placed around a computing environment. The trust zone concept is intentionally abstract, allowing the agency the flexibility to shrink or expand the trust zone to properly secure the embedded computing resource. For example, trust zone could be an agency's entire network, as in TIC 2. As examples will show in the following slides, a trust zone can also be a cloud container, or a branch office, or an application, or an endpoint, or the identity of a user. Ideally, we want to shrink that trust zone down to be as small as possible to limit the attack surface. The guidance allows agencies to have the flexibility to determine the size and shape of their trust zones. Those 4 dark dots are PEPs, policy enforcement points, a common industry term that can enforce security policies in and out of those trust zones. We'll see this diagram a few more times, each time with a slightly different narrative. With the concept of disparate trust zones, the perimeter can be anywhere an enterprise wants it to be. The perimeter can be dynamically created and elastic. The perimeter can be policy-based. The perimeter doesn't have to be bound by a network. Next slide, please. I mentioned the NIST Zero Trust Special Pub. Let's talk about Zero Trust for a moment. It's always important when discussing Zero Trust to recognize that Zero Trust is more than an architecture. Zero Trust is a philosophy and change in culture that needs to be embraced by the entire organization. There are 7 tenets in Zero Trust, and they align with some of the first principles in InfoSec: least privilege, access by dynamic policy, microsegmentation, and encryption at rest and in motion. So all these together are captured in the NIST Special Pub that you see there. Next slide, please. Protecting trust zones of Zero Trust. The upper right, in a traditional security model, an end user supplies credentials to the entire network to enter the network. Once verified, that end user is granted access throughout the network. But now, in the lower right-hand box, in the trust zone model, you can see that confidence needs to be continually established and reestablished through algorithms and models. One of the key points to understand in trust zones is that the underlying network is considered suspect, so that confidence isn't automatically inherited for the users and sessions right on top of the network. So how do you build confidence? By robustly applying ICAM, identity, credential, and access management, applying the different levels of access controls throughout the environment, and enriched by network analysis, telemetry feeds from the environment, and threat intel itself. Next slide, please. Zero trust and incident management. I think it's always important, again, to go down this road of adopting a zero trust mindset to understand how this new architecture may impact the incident response process. For instance, collection. What does the visibility detection look like when collecting from a zero trust platform? Is there a greater shift towards reliance on telemetry from the endpoint, in the client side or the service side? How does the visibility differ from the information that was collected under the old model? Analysis. How does the analysis differ, assuming the agency has a greater reliance on identity management? Prioritization. What is the new signal that the agency is looking for into the noise? What information does the agency act upon? What does it mean to be resilient in a zero trust environment? So these are some of the conversations we're hearing around the IT community. Next slide, please. So on this slide, to orientate everyone from left to right, we show 3 different architectures. TIC 2 is on the far left, then moving from a macro to a micro segmentation in the middle, and a zero trust environment on the far right. In each architecture, we show 4 resources that we want to protect: agency HQ, branch office, the data center, and remote user. For this slide's perspective, in each of the 3 diagrams, we show a blue shaded area as an area which has been hacked and compromised, an impacted area. On the left is that TIC 2 model, the traditional castle moat, the macro segmentation. The area is protected by one large PEP at the top of the zone. If there is a compromise within the perimeter, the adversary has potential of easily moving throughout the entire environment. The middle diagram shows how these same resources are protected by segmenting the resources into smaller, more granular trust zones. Instead of one large PEP, the resources are each protected by PEP, which can be tailored to their requirements. The blast radius is shrunk, where if one resource is impacted, in this case, agency headquarters, the adversary doesn't have the same freedom of movement between zones as when the trust zone is one large trust zone on the left. And the diagram on the far right shows a zero trust environment. The compromise is also against agency headquarters, but does impact the other 3 trust zones. You notice the network itself is not represented. As I mentioned earlier, the network is suspect in a zero trust environment. The blast radius can be restrained by a strong reliance on identity management and access controls. Next slide, please. Flexibility. Now I will focus on the second theme of the new guidance, flexibility. Next slide, please. Let's begin by discussing how the network has evolved. On the left side, we show the traditional traffic flows in a TIC 2 architecture. As all the trusted resources are at the bottom, the south end of that networking compass. The trusted resources are the on-prem, remote users, and the agency's applications and data centers. The traffic between each of these resources at the south end of the diagram, what has been called the east-west traffic, has been outside the scope of the TIC program. On the top side of that diagram, still on the left, we have some of the untrusted resources represented: the big bad web, public users, and agencies' cloud instances. The traffic between the top and the bottom is that north-south traffic corridor that we've been building our security around for the last 20 plus years. But in reality, we know there are varying levels of confidence and trust between those resources. The positioning of each resource isn't as easy as deciding who's on the north side, who's on the south side of the data flows. On the diagram on the right, some agencies look at the confidence they build for their cloud environments as not as a simple north or south, but somewhere in the middle. We show the CSP in the northeast quadrant. Some agencies consider remote users with a different level of trust than their on-prem users. So the agencies may place remote users in the northwest quadrant. Then when you start to map out all the data flows between the resources, you realize it's not nearly as simple as north and south, east and west. So what have we done? Next slide, please. We've broken the network compass. The architectural compass that we relied upon for the last 20 years is broken. The focus on labeling traffic into the traditional north or south or east and west data flows are less relevant in today's modern architectures. With TIC 3, we recognize that agencies need a new paradigm to account for the ever-increasing complexities and interconnectedness of agencies' on-prem, hybrid, and multi-cloud environments, while accounting for the needs of both the public and the agency users. We recognize agencies need new flexible architectures to support modern computing environments. Next slide, please. So TIC 3 offers a more flexible approach by allowing the agencies the flexibility to build and secure the architectures that best fits their needs. The architectures can include, at the top right, that traditional castle and moat perimeter. In the middle on the right, edges move toward a micro-segmented architecture. And at the circle at the bottom, supporting a zero trust environment. Agencies are able to embed the security services and countermeasures where they believe will best secure their environments. Next slide, please. Flexible security for agency needs. We begin to see what we mean by the new flexibility offered in TIC 3. Agencies have a new level of discretion how to create and secure trust zones in terms of the number of trust zones, depending on what is being protected, the composition of the trust zone, what's inside the trust zone, the interconnectedness of the trust zones, how the trust zones talk to each other, where the PEPs are located along the path between the trust zones, as well as security services or countermeasures that are within each PEP along the path. Next slide, please. So we show the flexibility the agency has in choosing the security framework that best suits their needs. We show 4 resources: agency headquarters, data center, branch office, remote user. Then we saw the slide before is from the perspective of a compromised environment. This time we show the flexibility and positioning of security. On the left is that TIC 2 model, the primary boundary protection at the top of the diagram, traditional TIC access point. Not the most flexible of architectures. That's where the enterprise firewalls, web proxies, detection, sensors, and other boundary protection mechanisms are placed. The middle diagram shows how these same resources are protected by segmenting the resources into smaller, more granular trust zones. Now we're able to position the security closer to the resources themselves. Instead of aggravating everyone at one access point, the trust zone can be protected by a PEP that is more tailored and focused on the resources that require protection. The diagram on the right shows a zero trust environment. You notice the network itself is not represented. As I mentioned earlier, the network is suspect. A lot of the controls in the zero trust environment have an identity focus embedded into them. Identity supports that new flexible model. Identity has become the fabric that binds the resources together. Identity is now becoming the network. Next slide, please. Visibility. I will focus on the third theme of the new guidance, visibility. We will now, visibility changes. Visibility needs data. Data comes from many disparate sources. With TIC 3, with trust zones and PEPs, we have the potential for many more sources of data than the old TIC 2 model. Visibility also should be about context, not only the activity. Detection needs people. People are hard to scale. We're just beginning to see the opportunities that machine learning and artificial intelligence can offer. And it shouldn't come as a shock that the attacker doesn't want to be detected. Attacks are becoming more sophisticated. Attacks are trying to evade the network defenses that we've built over the last 20 years. Next slide, please. The visibility narrative is evolving into two different camps, monitoring and observability. Two different sides of the same visibility coin. Monitoring, the lower left picture, watching the known unknowns, more towards watching a system, watching hundreds or thousands of systems as they're spun up and spun down in the cloud. Monitoring tends to be very specific, laser focused. Monitoring tends to have tight apertures. In fact, the way we can scale monitoring in the cloud can be many tight apertures, thousands of them. Observability, the upper right, watching more for the unknown unknowns. More broad focus. Instead of thousands of tiny apertures, one large, wide aperture. Looking for the abnormal, but not necessarily knowing what you're looking for. High cardinality, many unique items in the data set. High dimensionality, many different contexts. What does the system look like under normal state? What's under stress? What's performing a backup? Next slide, please. Also go into data gravity. CISA recognizes as data is generated in the cloud, the branch office or a data center. Unless the data is moved from where it is created, the data begins to accumulate mass. As the data accrues mass, the data accrues gravity. There's a new term you may have been hearing called data gravity. As data is generated, unless the data is moved or repositioned, the data will accumulate mass. As the data's mass grows, it starts to generate gravity. So it may make more sense to push services and security where the data is, within the trust zone. In effect, the data's increasing mass and gravity is drawn the security to it, versus moving the data through the apps of security services that are located in the old TIC 2 model. Next slide, please. Then also Sassy. I know Justin's coming up a little bit and he'll be talking about Sassy. CISA is leveraging Sassy for our own services and programs to assist agencies on their IT modernization endeavors. Sassy offers three benefits: reduces IT cost and complexity, focuses on pushing security as close to the network entities as possible, allows or denies connection to the service based on organizations' defined business rules, also focuses on the user experience and reduces risk. Next slide, please. Visibility. As we move the macro segmented into a micro segmented environment, we move the PEPs closer to the resources, we need to be aware of how this changes the context of visibility. In the far right, that old TIC 2 model, assists with visibility mainly the TIC or the PEPs, top of the diagram, becoming difficult to gain proper context. Results more of a challenge to shuffle the data where the sensors are located. This is beginning to invert some of our service model, moving towards Gartner's Sassy paradigm. Systems begin to push our services, NCPS and CDM, out to where the data is generated. You hear the same thing from GSA and their EIS team, how they are inverting the service model, offering new flexibility to support where the data is generated and located. Next slide, please. So TIC in the federal cybersecurity lifecycle. Start at the top, 12 o'clock. TIC program office works with agencies on TIC pilots, which will be used to develop TIC use case and overlays. JSA will leverage these use cases to develop EIS service packages. Move over to about 2 o'clock. Using these raw materials, overlays, and use cases, along with a wealth of other guidance, agencies will be using initiatives, FedRAMP, NIST, Special Pub, OMI memos. Agencies can build secure and efficient, repeatable environments. That's key, efficient, repeatable environments. As agencies use these templates to build their environments, now we move down to 4 o'clock. These repeatable environments will position the landscape for CISA CDM and NCPS programs to more efficiently monitor and observe these environments. Now we move over to 8 o'clock. As environments are secured, as we move to have more efficient, to gain visibility more efficiently, this can feed into agency SOCs along with CISA threat hunting team to gain a better understanding of the agency architecture. Ultimately, this leads to a more secure.gov. And to be fair, this is an agile loop. The whole time we're updating and repositioning our activities to improve ourselves. Next slide, please. I just want to briefly mention CDM, of course, with NCPS. CDM side, we look at the telemetry that CISA is looking to meet towards those monitoring and observability discussions, along with CDM's network security and capability and bound. Next slide, please. NCPS. There's a URL to look at the guidance. NCPS, also known as Einstein, has been the primary sensor deployment program for CISA. We deployed our sensors at the agency boundaries. For a long time, NCPS was strongly paired with TIC. As TIC supports a more decentralized architecture, the NCPS program is also moving to support a more decentralized environment. I encourage everyone to look at those 2 volumes. Next slide, please. Future focus. Let's wrap up by talking what's in the roadmap for TIC. Next slide, please. The program will focus on new pilots, new overlays, and use cases. Next slide, please. So we've had a number of pilots and we had a number of lessons learned. When we work with these pilots, we work with OMB, GSA, the sponsoring agency, and vendors. I think some of the initial pilots as much a pilot of the agency's environment as it was a piloting of our process. In other words, ensuring the right stakeholders in the room at the early stage understand the impacts. We also recognize having regular meetings with the pilots eases the data collection process. We've supported both broad pilots and more focused pilots. Typically easier to distill lessons learned from pilots that are more focused on particular architecture or need. Next slide, please. And overlays. So vendors have started mapping their services to the capabilities listed in the security capability catalog. We're starting to see some vendor overlays on the market now. Agencies are encouraged to tailor the overlays to their environments. The overlays are created and maintained by the vendors. And additional details on the overlays can be found in an overlay handbook. Next slide. And these are use case generation. I mentioned these a little bit, but there's a lot of different entities that go into building these use cases, different teams at CISA, OMB and their USDS team, the Federal CISO Council, GSA, the sponsoring agency, and the vendors. They all feed into these use cases we build out. Next slide, please. And I want to wrap up on the TIC use case adoption generation, going from left to right. There's pilots. The agencies can feed into these pilots, or we can talk to the agencies with interviews. Those feed into the use cases. Then agencies can start looking to interpret that use cases. Some agencies are building out solutions architectures based on those TIC use cases. Next slide, please. The benefits of the use case. Agencies get the flexibility to combine and implement TIC use cases that match their network architecture, to choose a security pattern option that best fits their mission needs, and explains the specific implementation guidance for security capabilities applicable to each use case. Next slide. And I think we're going to wrap up on this slide. This is just where we are in the process of document releases. We've had phase 1 through phase 4. Phase 1 is where we released all the guidance I mentioned before. We're just through phase 2. We released the draft of the remote user use case in December. And beginning of April, released the final copies of the traditional TIC in the branch office. We're now moving on to phase 3. We have another use cases that we're looking at out there in the pipeline. We're also talking about having some supporting IPv6 guidance. And ideally, even when we get to those use cases, which are outlined in the OMB memo, phase 4, potential other use cases, including zero trust use case. So I'm going to wrap up the presentation there. I know Justin and team will talk a little bit more about the use case in the next segment. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sean. That was such an awesome keynote. We really appreciate that. Super informative, and it's always great to hear more about CISA and TIC 3.0. Up next, if my first panelists of the day would please turn their cameras and their audio on, we will begin our first panel. But before we begin, I just want to encourage the audience to please submit questions of your own in the Q&A section of this platform. We'll be going through them during and after this panel, so please send them in as we go. Please also remember to answer the poll questions that we pop up to ensure that you receive your CPE credits for today. So first, I would like to just briefly introduce each of my panelists. If you could give a little wave to the camera when I say your name. We have Trifinia Salzman. She is a security architect at USBA, and she's also the government co-chair for the Zero Trust Working Group here at ATARC, alongside Jerry Karen with the Department of State. We also have Justin Morgan, the solutions architect at GSA. And we also have Drew Epperson, the Senior Director of Federal Engineering over at Palo Alto Networks. So we're going to begin by having each panelist share a little bit more about themselves and the work that they are doing with TIC 3.0. If we could have Trifinia kick us off, please.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kirsten, for having me. I've really enjoyed all of the ATARC panels. And Sean, thank you for your keynote speech. So yes, I am one of the security architects for the SBA. I work on the Zero Trust Initiative, TIC 3.0, and SOAR. And so right now we've really, we've kind of gained our stride now that, well, the pandemic is kind of tapering off, or at least we have our bearings together when it comes to the technologies surrounding the pandemic. So now we're kind of gaining our stride, going back, reevaluating how to move us forward and continue to move us forward.
Awesome, thank you. And I would like to hear from Justin next.
Yeah, hey, good afternoon, folks. As Kirsten said, I'm Justin. I work in the, right now it's GSA IT category, Enterprise Technology Solutions, and the Solutions Development Office, which supports the technical aspects of the EIS program, among other things. So yeah, long list there, sorry. But yeah, we're right now focused on helping agencies move forward with their transitions within our office, particularly our enterprise technology services or solutions office, excuse me. And one of the things that we're doing from the, I guess, the technical side of EIS is we are doing the scope review process for all the solicitations that come through. So one of the big things we're trying to do is offer areas to consider modernization, other services they should add to help them push forward with modernization should they get into transition and then find out, oh yeah, I would like to add this service or modernize here. It's already on their award. They don't have to go back to the well. So that's some of the advice we're handing out. We've also added some recent things to EIS, and I'll talk about that as we move along. But that's really where our office is focused, is trying to help agencies modernize their infrastructure, make them aware of how they can modernize their infrastructure, and really help out where we can with solicitation templates, review of inventory, review of solicitations, advice, things like that.
Excellent, thank you. And Drew.
Yeah, Drew Epperson with Palo Alto Networks. Thanks for having us today. So in my position, what we're doing on the industry side, working with people like Justin and Trifina, is using a product that we call Prisma Access, which is a Sassy product, to align to some of the use cases that Sean talked about. So on TIC 3.0, remote user, remote branch, SD-WAN, edge compute, 5G, all of these capabilities kind of converge inside of Zero Trust, converge inside of TIC 3.0. And so part of what we're doing on the industry side is helping our joint partners and customers understand what technology can provide today, how it can be used, how it aligns to the TIC 3.0 guidance. And then two areas that we've recently taken on that we're very excited and working with CISA and the larger team on is obviously Zero Trust. A lot of effort around that and creating policy enforcement points, end to end, whether it's the user, the application, the device, all the way through cloud environments, and then obviously Zero Trust network access. And then the newer one that we're really excited about is working with what Sean was talking about on NCPS, or the CLAW, which by far is the best acronym that the federal government's ever come up with. But integrating our solution into the CLAW, mapping the data and telemetry feeds so that joint customers, partners know what they can pull from our solution and transfer automatically into CLAW. And so those are two areas that we're specifically focused on, and we'll talk a little bit about those here in a little while as well.
Excellent. Thank you guys for sharing that. So I think to start us off, we're going to pop up our first poll question, which will lead into our first discussion question. Alyssa, if you could please put that up for our audience and our panelists to answer. In your opinion, how closely aligned is Zero Trust and TIC 3.0? So those are some words that have already come up quite a bit during this discussion. Do you believe that they are very aligned, slightly aligned, you're not sure, or not aligned at all? Take a moment, please, and answer that for us, and then we will jump right into it. And maybe we'll go ahead and see the results first before we discuss. Okay, looks like for the most part, people believe they're very aligned. I'm going to ask the first question to Trifinia. I know you have some insight into this poll question that our audience answered. Where do you see the overlap with TIC 3.0 and Zero Trust? And is there a way to have one without another? Any thoughts around that?
Yeah, so I actually disagree with the majority of the people who answered, because as I have been researching it, with Zero Trust and TIC 3.0, you can have TIC 3.0 set up, but you may not have Zero Trust implemented. So with TIC 3.0, the whole end game is to get that information to the DHS, right? That's the ultimate outcome, the objective. With zero trust, it's more future thinking, like Sean was talking about. It's not just an architecture, it's a complete cultural shift and a forward way of thinking when it comes to cybersecurity. So I believe you can have one without the other. But there eventually, if you're doing it right, and if you continue down that path, then there may be some overlap with TIC 3.0 and zero trust. But I believe you can have one without the other. Drew, Justin, what do you guys think?
Yeah, I'll jump in there. I definitely think that you can have one without the other, but I would say that TIC 3.0 and decentralizing your network and putting policy enforcement closer to the data access points will increase your user experience while potentially also increasing security. I know that's a debatable topic sometimes. But you can certainly have one without the other. But if you're modernizing your overall network and implementing technologies like SD-WAN, which in particular, if you're looking at the branch office use case, which is one of the recent CISA use case updates guidance for TIC 3.0. And SD-WAN is a main enabler of that use case, because the idea is you're decentralizing your network and you're applying policy at that site versus home running it back. That in that scenario, yeah, you would need TIC 3.0 to adapt the zero trust follow on. And you know, I kind of use this weird little analogy of the crawl, walk, run, which is like crawl, get the SD-WAN, walk, go to TIC 3.0 and decentralize your network traffic, run, zero trust. So it's kind of, that's the way I'm looking at it, but totally agree with you. You can have one without the other, but as your network moves on and evolves, it's certainly good to decentralize your traffic and enforce policy at the closest edge of data access.
Yeah, I think in typical fashion, I agree with both of you. Just try to prevent any arguments. Now, I think one of the things that we've been working with our partners on is, I don't, every once in a while we'll bump into people who believe that in taking on TIC 3.0 use cases and architectures, it is inherently zero trust enabled, which I think is some of the process, right? And I'm really happy to hear Sean talk about the fact that it's a methodology, it's a mindset, it's decision making, it's not a technology you can buy. And so I think on the industry side specifically, as part of our partnership is, we industry partners need to be really honest about how you take technologies that can be used for something like TIC 3.0 and convert those into zero trust deployment architecture designs, while not, kind of inferring that if you buy a technology and deployment and you deploy it, it just inherently comes, with some zero trust enabled technology sphere, because that it just doesn't exist. But I think, to Trina's point, I think really in TIC 3.0, it's getting the policy enforcement points closer to what needs to be protected, identifying those protection surfaces, and then creating very explicit policy about how things should and should not happen. And I think that, that second part is what Justin's talking about, which is, wall or crawl, walk, run, just getting the technology out there is a big success. And then, getting the policy right is kind of that last step.
Yeah, in the working group, we discussed the peanut butter approach versus the crown jewels, right? With the peanut butter approach, you're spreading the peanut butter, your security across everything. But as Drew, you were saying with TIC 3.0, it moves those policy enforcement points closer to the data. So you want to protect the crown jewels. And so with TIC 3.0, it's almost like the technologies are enabling you to get to zero trust. But yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. We have an audience question coming in. Mark says that he agrees with Trifinia. Zero trust is a real shift from role-based access controls, whether with TIC 3.0 or not. Clearly, TIC 3.0 requires a cyber kill chain method that zero trust does not need. TIC 3.0 seems to be raising the cyber kill chain approach back to the forefront. Do you agree or disagree with that?
So
I apologize. I'm reading the question. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Justin.
sorry, me too.
I think what he's talking about is where you kind of stop access into the network. And it is true that if you say distribute to TIC 3.0 and you have policy enforcement at that edge, once they get past that policy enforcement point, they can get to whatever they have access to. Whereas zero trust does that continuous authorization, which is not inherent to TIC 3.0. So I would agree with you that TIC 3.0 it's And that's where I say it's kind of like steps, right? You know, it's, if you look at it from, there used to be the one entry or, you know, a couple different entry points depending on your size. Now you're distributing it potentially with TIC 3.0 to other entry points, but zero trust is all the way to the edge of the data and all the way to the endpoint. So it's a different way of looking at it. I answered that question.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that we find ourselves in this conversation a lot is zero trust in itself. Great concept. Definitely something we should all focus on, but there still needs to be, at least in our mind, on our side, inspection, right? Like you still need protection. We have some customers sometimes that'll say things like, if I really move to a zero trust architecture, does inspection and protection and malware analysis and DLP, do these things even matter anymore? Because I'm only explicitly allowing what should and should not happen. There still definitely is a need for protective capabilities inside of these architectures, which I think is maybe what he's getting at as well on the cyber kill chain.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. How would you each describe the current state of zero trust security at your agency currently?
Yeah, so at the SBA, we're still working out the architecture and getting an inventory of everything that we have, right? With COVID-19, our assets dramatically increased. We went from 5,000 employees to 20,000 employees. So we're looking at our individual use cases, and we're actually going through this at the working group as well. You know, does the person use a PIV card? Are they using MFA? How are they accessing the data? Is the data on-prem? Do they need a VPN? We're kind of going through all of that individually, and that creates our architecture. So that's where we are at the SBA.
And go ahead, Justin.
I'll add on that, you know, while I don't work in the OCIO group at GSA, I am a user, and it's a pretty good user experience, I'll say. And a lot of us at GSA were already teleworking pretty heavily. So when we shifted to the full, you know, 5 days a week, it wasn't that big of a deal. I mean, there was some infrastructure plus ups and things they had to do, but they definitely still have, to steal a term from Sean's guidance, security zones wrapped around certain apps and data that you need to enter the network a certain way to access them, whether it's VPN, or whether you're allowed to go direct, like the remote user use case where you're allowed to say go to direct the cloud sources. And there's tools on the endpoints. They're capturing all DNS queries, whether you're on DNS or excuse me, on VPN or not. So there's some aspects there, but I know they're working towards it. But we actually have a pretty good user experience here, and I feel like we're protecting things pretty well.
Great, thank you. Going back to something that I think, Drew, this might be for you that you mentioned. Audience question is, if FD1 leverages VPN, does it play into TIC 3.0? This person views it separately, but do you have a different perspective?
Yeah, this will be a good discussion. Yeah, maybe to start, in our eyes on the industry side, you know, two kind of phases of SD-WAN. One that we would consider kind of a legacy WAN and then a legacy SD-WAN, and then, you know, kind of a next generation application-based SD-WAN deployment. I think what we're driving at there is traditionally to get remote branch sites, which, you know, Justin talked about earlier, is one of the driving use cases for SD-WAN currently. You know, we would use things like static connectivity over like MPLS from site to site to site. You bring all the traffic back, and that's where you do a lot of the inspection. The policy enforcement point is not out at the remote branch unless you actually deploy gear and people out there to do that, which becomes increasingly expensive. And then when we start talking about SD-WAN, the adoption of software-defined implementations that allow you to do application-based routing over multiple connection types become really interesting. And what we've seen on our side is the ability to connect, you know, first, middle, and last mile through a consistent security approach, I think is really the difference. And whether that is, you know, quote unquote, a VPN out at the mobile, or not the mobile, the branch location, or just a secure tunnel, right? Which, you know, is another, you know, connectivity layer. I think the benefit of it is that you actually get a PEP out near the thing you're trying to protect at the branch, and you're able to control it from a centralized location, so you don't have to deploy people and assets out. And, you know, one of the things that the industry's been doing for a long time that I think now, especially with SD-WAN, is becoming increasingly important, is just simple things like zero touch provisioning, where if you had to, during a COVID type event need to deploy things out to branch sites to get connectivity back under TIC 3.0 guidance using the remote branch use cases, just the idea that you could provision, you could literally just have somebody plug it in, zero touch provision it, and then apply a enforcement policy to it and have it act as a PEP is a really, really important capability that historically we just haven't been taking advantage of.
Thanks, Drew. And for those in our audience who are unaware, could you just provide like a brief high-level overview of SD-WAN and what that is?
Yeah. So, instead of using, like I said, something like, I think, most people probably in the federal government are using things like NPLS capabilities to connect site to site to site to site. Think of overlaying that with a software defined infrastructure using things, whether it's, cloud overlays or virtual overlays that then allow you to connect those remote sites over multiple connection types. So one of the benefits on SD-WAN is, for somebody like US Postal Service operating out in a very remote rural area, may not have access to the highest and latest and greatest connectivity, but they may have something like broadband or T1 or 5G, and you can use that as a connectivity layer. And then SD-WAN essentially picks based on application flow, traffic, and criticality, what connectivity it wants to use to get that application traffic where it needs to go. And so think of it as almost this, when properly implemented, this almost self-healing, self-learning infrastructure that literally just gets application data where it needs to go using a myriad of different connectivity capabilities, but giving us on the security side central visibility and management of that so that you can do enforcement across the entire enterprise.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that with us. So we're probably going to have to put up another poll question now, but that's okay because we're transitioning into a TIC question anyways. Alyssa, if you could please post that for our audience. How familiar are you with what TIC 3.0 is? And remember, if you don't answer this, you don't get your CP credit, so make sure you answer. The options are, you know all about TIC, you know what it is, but would like to learn more. You are aware that it is important, but are unfamiliar with how to implement it. You have no idea what it is, or other. So go ahead and answer that. And while folks are answering that, Justin, we had a question come in for you. Justin would appreciate anything you should know from an EIS perspective and TIC 3.0. Will there be an opportunity to discuss our modernization planning with EIS to ensure we consider TIC 3.0 into our architecture?
So yes, and whoever asked that question, please reach out to me because we actually through our scope review process, we certainly are offering that advice now, and I'll say. Some of the things we've been doing to try to keep EIS forward with some of these things is we recently in March released a TIC service, Trusted Internet Connection service under Managed Security Service. That's the fourth subservice under MSS now. So please make sure you have MSS on your solicitation. That's step one, because then you can pivot to that later. I would say. But yeah, I mean, we at GSA are open to discussing with agencies openly how they think how they can best position themselves to modernize through EIS in particular, but other vehicles as well. We have access to review their current inventory, their legacy inventory, and with their help can piece together kind of what the next step would look like. So yeah, we're open to that, and we also have solicitation templates to help at least get you started in that direction. Of course, some of that takes further consultation and stuff to try to lay out the exact services you require and things. And we do those sessions with agencies often. A solicitation assistance tool is what we call it. But yeah, please reach out and we can carry that conversation further.
Excellent, thank you. So the results are in. Most people know what TIC is, but would like to know more about TIC 3.0, implementing it throughout the federal government and its importance. Trifinia, do you have any thoughts about this or any advice?
Yeah, with TIC 3.0, I had to look at, okay, what is the main objective of this? Again, it's to get the information that you need to DHS. So it's leveraging that NCPS document that Sean was referring to, I highly recommend you take a look at it, draft 2, because it really has some like the nitty gritty telemetry stuff that you need to pull for TIC 3.0. So it's very helpful. I highly recommend you read it. And then it also, you have to evaluate the ultimate objective. And there's also security objectives in the TIC 3.0 guidebook to talk about managing traffic, protecting traffic, ensuring your service resiliency, and ensuring the effective response. So it's figuring out what you as an agency can do to answer those questions and then implementing them.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And Drew, how about you? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think in working with customers and partners, I would agree with Trinity. I think setting internally, looking at the guidance, looking at the architectures, there's a lot of really helpful collateral out there, whether it's from public or private industry who has released things like that. Justin and GSA have put out a ton of guidance on how to do this properly in both the acquisition and also implementation. What we try to do with our partners usually is just set some pretty simple milestones, like create some goals, drive toward those, map those out in tabletop exercises, and then really understand what technologies you currently have that can help you achieve those and where you might need an investment strategy. And I think the one thing that we've come to realize the most, especially in TIC 3.0 and also approaching zero trust, the ability to continuously monitor and maintain that environment is critical, because I think there's some sense that once you get it in place, you're good. But we're always adding new people, new branches, new applications, new resources, new cloud activities that need to happen. And so the idea that, as you start developing your strategy and implementation, that you have a plan for maintenance, monitoring, and where possible, automating the kind of upkeep of that becomes really, really important.
Mm-hmm. And just oh, go ahead, Jeffrey.
Sorry. I would also chime in that you should take a look at the ATARC TIC 3.0 presentations. All of the vendors, multiple vendors presented their TIC 3.0 solutions, and it was very helpful to watch those, and it kind of gives you as an idea on how to implement TIC 3.0 in your agency. I highly recommend that.
Yes, thank you for that plug, and you can reach out to me if you'd like to access those videos. Justin, so how can the TIC 3.0 policy guidance help bring your agency closer to the innovation of the private sector?
Yeah, that's a good one. I would say that part of the big thing is the goal that we need to, I guess, move forward to is better user experience, closer access to data, things like that. And that starts with decentralizing your networks and rethinking your security strategy, really. I mean, and because in a lot of locations, and this is where the edge panel will come up next and talk more about edge computing, but I would say that becomes important, because if you can provide quicker access to, say, customers to access your site or your services or whatever, they don't care where they access it from, they just want to access it. So same goes with our public sector services, right? As they want to be able to connect, not wait for things to load or however. So TIC 3.0, it does allow through the recent guidance to decentralize your network and try to get that data closer to the customer, to the public. So I think in that regard is where it's going to follow more so in TIC 3.0, and of course that leads into, I said it again, the edge discussion, but that's really, you have to rethink how your network is architected. And one of the things we're stressing during the EIS transition in particular is, hey, rethink how you're deployed. Because in many cases, if you're going from legacy TDM like DS3s, T1s, whatever, over to Ethernet, possibly going to SD-WAN, maybe incorporating broadband internet, you're already making a massive change. Why don't you take it a step further while you're at it and you're spending that money? It's kind of, that's one of the things we're trying to push as a message here. But one of the other things I would say is that we're also hearing from agencies that it's difficult to run parallel networks and pay for them. So that becomes a challenge too, right? So not a shameless plug, but kind of the Technology Modernization Fund. And check that out, tmf.cio.gov, and see if that could possibly help you. It's been plussed up recently significantly by $1 billion. So it's I know they're actively looking for applications and things like that to try to move federal IT forward and modernize it. So that parallel networking aspect is a concern when you're talking about standing up that I guess in transition infrastructure. But I realize that doesn't directly go on to the conversation of how it gets us closer to public. But in order to do that, we have to modernize. And in order to do that, some ways you have to run parallel for some period of time.
And to pull the thread a little bit on your edge computing comment about that, how does that, relate to cloud and the TIC 3.0, like for people who have no idea what that is? Could you give an overview on, how to best go about that within your own agency?
Yeah, I mean, actually, if you don't mind, I wouldn't mind punting that to Drew, who actually has a Sassy product and is talking to agencies and would probably have a better insight there. But I mean, I could give you some theory stuff, but he would give you some more real world.
All right.
Yeah, I think the two, I appreciate that, Justin. No, the two things that have popped up recently, Trifini earlier said, like, zero trust needs to be an end-to-end journey, right? And so one of the things inside of TIC 3.0, if we just assume that we can decentralize the network, we can get users remote or branch directly to the cloud assets that they need access to without, routing and hairpinning their traffic back into the data center and then through the old traditional TIC stacks and then out. If we do that, then we assume that we need to be able to move policy enforcement points closer to those computing environments. So that could be public cloud, it could be hybrid cloud, it could be edge compute. And one of the things that's come up recently, and I think it's under that maybe an emerging use case, is the federal government's investing a lot of R&D and deployment dollars in 5G. And so one of the things that has come up in some of our conversations is, if we have 5G deployments out at the edge and maybe using something like a MEC, which would be an edge compute cluster essentially, how do we connect that 5G deployment back through the TIC implementation so that we get visibility, security, a zero trust implementation all the way out to those edge devices running on that 5G network? That, to Justin's point, is where these Sassy technologies become really, really helpful, because really what they're doing is they're adding that kind of middle mile security implementation between the traditional deployed infrastructure and the edge, but doing it through a cloud delivered service that applies all of the security protections and visibility that you need. And then the last kind of hurdle there traditionally has been something like linking into NCPS, just because you need that type of inspection. And so that's why we were very excited to see CISA release some of the guidance around the cloud log aggregation warehouse, where we as a Sassy provider can then just ship that data cloud native to another cloud service without then having to route it all the way back through the network. You pair those two things up and you come up with a pretty flexible design that can be used for a lot of different use cases, but one of them right now obviously is 5G at the edge.
Mm-hmm. And is there a particular use case that you're referring to when you discuss the 5G deployments with TIC 3.0?
Not any specific implementation. There just seems to be a lot of interest in the federal government right now, both on the DoD and civilian side of the government around 5G implementations, just because that's an emerging investment area that also has a lot of use cases. And when we can connect those devices and infrastructure over 5G, suddenly the ability to get real-time data back and forth is drastically increased, which I think Justin earlier said it's all about the user experience. Well, when whatever those devices are, whether they're medical devices or mail sorting devices, whatever they are connected, when that experience is better for the in-state user or the person consuming that service that they're operating, that's a good thing. And so that's something we're very interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And just to add on real quick, the one of the use cases for 5G that we're really starting to talk more with our service providers is that last mile, especially to those rural areas like Drew mentioned, the post office scenario. We're, as things move along and folks are modernize their telecommunications, getting rid of the old TDM, the providers are trying to not provide those links anymore. So it's kind of where we can implement things like a 5G or even LTE to do that last mile connection as either a leg into an SD-WAN deployment or just as your primary connectivity. That's one of the things we're definitely discussing with the providers too. That's certainly something we'll see more of as we move along with this transition, I know.
Excellent, thank you. So I want to squeeze in our last poll question. Alyssa, if you could please put that one up. Oh, she's quick right now. Okay. How far along do you feel the adoption of TIC 3.0 is in your agency or company? Just a reminder again, make sure to answer this for your CPE credits. And then we can close out our polls. The options you have are fully committed, you have started but not fully implemented, you have a plan, now time to execute, currently just talking about it, or not adopted it at all. And Alyssa, you can post those results when you get a moment. All right, interesting. So more people are currently just talking about implementing TIC 3.0. So now that, you know, we're going back to the reevaluation stage of moving forward for agencies, and of course we can't get through a panel without talking about COVID-19, right? We're all aware at this point that it has caused a dramatic and immediate increase for secure remote access for both citizens and employees. So my question to the panelists, and I'll just throw this out there, whoever wants to take a stab at it first, is what kind of immediate steps, actions did your agency take to accommodate for that? And what do you see as, you know, your path moving forward, like Trifinia mentioned before, in the reevaluation stage? So yeah, which panelist would like to go first to answer that? Trifinia, you came off first.
Yeah, I came off mute. I know for the SBA, we created some policies that forced MFA because we had to drop ship a lot of computers very quickly. And so in order for people to access those cloud resources, we made sure that multi-factor was turned on at that time. That was just the first thing that we did. And now that we're caught our breath, we're going back around, reevaluating those policies, making sure that they are as secure as they possibly can. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. And I'll say from the GSA perspective, again, as a user, not so much from the CIO side, but I'll say that we were pretty well off already because most of us were teleworking, but they did have to plus up some VPN endpoints and things like that. They did implement more multi-factor authentication points, and I believe split tunneling was enabled as well for some of that direct to cloud access, which does follow a lot with the remote user use case, the TIC 3.0, where they're allowing that traffic pattern direct. I would say that's kind of the big changes I think that happened at GSA. Now, that's not to say other agencies that we helped do these rapid modifications or these rapid orders that they had to do to plus up either their traditional TIC or MTIP services, or buy a bunch of laptops or these VPN concentrators or whatever the case may be. There was a significant scramble there for a good month or so, if not more. But initially, and we, from what I understood, we helped out pretty good and processed a heck of a lot of mods very quick, so folks could get on with it and do their work.
Excellent. And Drew, from the industry perspective, what do you see as sort of the path moving forward for agencies?
Yeah, I mean, I think real quick back on the COVID piece. I think something that we realized during that time is, we as a private organization, a lot of people work remotely wherever they'd like, and use a lot of the same technology to talk about here today. I think what we realized in talking to a lot of the customers, both commercial and public sector, is, not many people plan to have 70-75% of their workforce remote. Hardly anyone planned for 100% remote work. And so to Justin's point, in kind of an interesting way, COVID for us created a kind of an inflection point where instead of, buying hardware or VPN concentrators or continuing to route data through the data center, we had customers who historically had been a little risk adverse say things like, this seems like there could be an opportunity to adopt some of the technologies like Sassy technologies to solve this problem and to move us forward in a modernization effort. And so, in typical fashion, the federal government took the opportunity a challenge, and then converted that almost to a benefit in some cases to say, sure, we can invest in hardware infrastructure, but how's that going to help us next time, right? And so I think that it was a really good public-private partnership, specifically with people like Justin, who can then help the government agencies navigate the procurement path to get the technologies and services that they needed to meet the mission intent that they had and do it in a new and creative way. I think the path forward, on the industry side, specifically around TIC 3.0, is just to increase ease of use, right? So how do we quickly onboard people? How do we make it easy to get the right policies and the right data into things like the cloud log aggregation warehouse? How do we make it easier to see all the deployed policy enforcement points across enterprise boundary, whether it's at the cloud, at the endpoint, in the data center, wherever, at the remote branch, and then enforce a common security implementation? I think that's kind of the next hurdle from the industry standpoint. Is there still seems to be that as users and data move through the TIC 3.0 solution, there are opportunities where they may get different types of policy throughout. And I think the idea of this unified policy applied across the enterprise, regardless of who you are or where you connect from, you get the same type of consistent security implementation and policy. That I think that is the next big hurdle that we all need to jump into and solve. That way we have a consistent deployment all the way through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great, thank you. And we had an audience question come in. I think this might have been for Justin, but if it's someone else, jump on in and answer it anyways. Does IPv6 make TIC 3.0 implementation easier? We are facing milestones from OMB to continue progressing with IPv6.
Honestly, it's I don't think it makes it easier or harder, because right now you're supposed to be running a dual stack, and anything facing the internet is supposed to have a v6 accessible address and name out there now. So if you look at it in the case of, say, an SD-WAN appliance or something for a control path, that should be being deployed with a v6 address and a v4. We are actually advising agencies to make sure that if they're doing a new deployment, go ahead and do it in v6 as much as you can versus having to turn around and do it again later. While you have that engineering resource and there's people on now deploying your new infrastructure, go ahead and do it. It's part of the requirements. It's part of the contract. And we actually recently updated the contract to include the reference to the latest OMB memo on v6, which basically cites the IPv6 only. And then there's working groups going on. But as many of you know, when you start looking at things like broadband and the various providers that you can get, not all of them will give you a v6 address. So you still have that concern and you have that issue. That's going to be corrected. That's why OMB has this long run lane, or whatever you want to call it, on the timeline to be all v6 only. So the point is, they're getting it out there because they want providers to be aware that this is where the federal government's going. Please comply, essentially, or you'll, I don't want to say disqualify yourself, but kind of, right? And that's kind of one of the things that I would say is, it's not necessarily making something like a zero trust or a TIC 3 or even an SD-WAN deployment harder. It should be part of it, absolutely. So just when you're doing these things, just make sure that's included and in your requirements and your provider's aware of it.
Thank you. And Doug Dougherty would like to know, with TIC on EIS and some use cases finalized by CISO, when are agencies expecting to be meeting those new requirements as they can, or is there tracking to ensure adoption? And if no monitoring now, then when? What's the urgency to get and use TIC 3.0?
Yeah, and thanks, Doug from Lumen, by the way. But yeah, the way I understand it is CISA's issued the guidance. The OMB memo, the 19-26, essentially said, we're going to issue guidance, and for lack of a better term, agencies are kind of on their own to implement it. There is no central monitoring or reach back or any of that, but there's the guidance from CISA is what it is, and it's to be followed. So I would say, as far as timelines and things, I'd have to get back to you on that, Doug. I haven't heard any specific timelines, but I know that it's current guidance. It's in its final state. So agencies deploying or looking to be, I don't want to use compliant because there is no compliance going forward, but they really should be implementing those security capabilities within TIC 3.0 where applicable, especially if they're deploying new solutions. But good question, and I'll get back to you on that one, Doug. Thanks.
And to our audience, keep on sending in the questions. They've been excellent so far. So pivoting over to cloud technologies, Trifinia, what is your experience and/or have you utilized cloud service providers? For more information? If so, what would be the value proposition associated with those?
Yeah, so with those, I'm speaking, or my immediate thought is of the overlays. So I've reached out to a couple of our cloud service providers and also vendors for the overlays that are mentioned in TIC 3.0. And all it is it's a giant spreadsheet with a bunch of technical requirements on it. And the vendor will then fill it out and say what they are meeting and what they're not meeting. So then you as an agency can take that overlay and evaluate what this vendor is providing for you and figure out where the gaps are. So that's been my immediate thought when it comes to the value proposition for this, for the cloud service providers.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And Drew, from your industry perspective, how do you see agencies leveraging and accelerating their adoption of cloud technology, whether it be infrastructure as a service, software as a service, email as a service, et cetera?
Yeah, I think it's speed and flexibility, right? Any time you can do something, consume it as a service, that means you don't necessarily have to deploy and maintain it yourself. The whole joy of cloud, ubiquitous access and speed and flexibility. And so I think, when it comes to TIC 3.0, especially Trifinia's point about overlays, I think what we've done well, broadly, I'll speak for all of industry, is try to make it really clear and transparent where we can help based on the requirements and the policy, and where you might need other technologies to kind of flush that out. And so those overlays are really cool, because as an agency, you can pull them down, you can look at them and evaluate, I have these two things, and now I pull down this overlay and it's going to meet the need, for the gaps I have. Or you can, take a couple and piece them together and come up with exactly what you need. And so I think when it comes to the cloud technologies, though, things like what Justin's talking about with SD-WAN, like that becomes a whole new delivery mechanism where, used to even traditional SD-WAN was somewhat cumbersome to deploy and maintain and monitor. But now cloud delivered SD-WAN technologies make it even easier, right? You can immediately onboard, you can scale up, you can scale down, you can dynamically create policy and deploy it across the entire enterprise, global, if you wanted to, all from a cloud-based management location, which is even better, right? And the new, AI ops, it's a great term, but the idea that now we can actually use machine analytics to help us steer and drive application-based traffic where it needs to go efficiently, without a human being involved, is an amazing technology that I think cloud is, the underpinning technology that's driving that capability out to the field.
Great, thank you. And this question came through while Drew was speaking, but unlike MTIP's TIC 3 on EIS requires each agency to ATO itself, will there be any sharing to cut down on the ATO effort?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So GSA is continuing with the ATO and the MTIP services, but they're locked at the 2.2 TIC standard or guidance. There is, I strongly advise you take a look at the traditional TIC use case that CISA posted in early April. There's actually a table in there toward the end that shows what was with TIC 2.2 and what's new in TIC 3.0. And what we've done to try to help with some of that is that managed security services TIC service. That's your gap filler right there. And within that, the overlays were being discussed earlier. We've actually added that as a requirement, that when the provider is providing a TIC service to you, or TIC service that is in line with TIC 3.0 guidance, that they do produce the overlay and provide you, so they can show you where it maps and where it doesn't map to the TIC 3.0 capabilities. So it is true that responsibility is shifted to the agency, as just like anything in their GSS. We have also had conversations with all of the EIS providers with regards to when they're doing their overlays and they are helping a customer say onboard this, maybe, I don't want to say for the first time, but depending on what services were ordered. And if they've been given the task to do the 853 controls to help fill in the gaps, keep that, put it in your catalog and repeat it and sell it as a managed security service to the next one. So it's kind of, that's where the repeat can come. And that's what we're hoping our providers are going to do is take a look at the requirements, try to make some commonality out of it and get their overlays done, and where possible, create that set of 853 controls where necessary that they can then pass on to the agency. So that's kind of where we are right now with it. But it is true that has shifted to the agency, correct?
Excellent, thank you. And another question, or is this a question? We were working with Google and Azure to develop templates and blueprints for use in, I don't know if that's a question. Okay, we'll move on. So how will your agency expand on cloud technology implementation efforts? How will it improve the public-facing services? So yeah, let's focus on public-facing services. How can we improve upon those based off of cloud technology implementation? Drew, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I think from the agency standpoint, obviously, Justin and Trifini will have a better view. But from an industry standpoint, there's just some capabilities that I think are expanded there, right? So one of the things that driving hard inside of the federal government right now, cloud-based technologies, infrastructure as code. So one of the risk that any company or organization takes when moving into a cloud environment is misconfigurations. Can't count how many times you see exposed S3 buckets with unencrypted data that cause data leaks, right? Like super simple stuff that we would all like just nod and say, of course, that should not happen, but yet it happens over and over and over and over. So the real question becomes, why is that, and how do we stop that? And so I think for us on the industry side, one of the things that you're seeing industry drive hard at is infrastructure as code, where you can create a secure deployment, a secure configuration, execute it, it runs. There's not a human in there pushing buttons and selecting things, which then makes it more consistent, drives faster adoption, and just adds a different layer of security. And so, as the federal government continues to move into cloud-based applications, specifically for public-facing assets, that concept of end-to-end zero trust becomes incredibly important. Is it running on, is it PaaS? Is it a container? Is it a microservice? Is it a function as a service, serverless compute? Your zero trust architecture should take into account all those different elements and create a policy enforcement point there for them. But as you're deploying a public cloud infrastructure as code templates that are natively secure will help a lot.
Excellent, thank you. And then from the agency perspective, how do you foresee improving public-facing services with these cloud technologies?
Yeah, at the SBA, so there's quite a few public-facing websites that we are dealing with and we're having to spin up. And honestly, the biggest game changer has been the fact that COVID-19 brought forth not just operations, but security in mind. So now both people are at the table, both people are looking at the cloud technologies available and figuring out how we can make things better. So at the SBA, there's been a big push to bring operations and security together to come up with a better solution, not just for us, but for the American people and for who we're serving.
Awesome. Mm-hmm. And Justin, how about you at your agency?
Yeah, I'll say more so from the acquisition side. And we have the Cloud Information Center here within the ITC office, and it's cic.gsa.gov. And on there is several templates for solicitations, comparisons of cloud services, many other things, cost calculators, all kinds of stuff on there. Anybody looking to go there, please take a look. And I would say many agencies started with the productivity suites, like your Microsoft 365 or your G Suite or whatever. And then they moved into their infrastructure as a service, maybe over the internet, and then they put in those direct connects or express routes or whatever it is. And now they're moving full-blown workloads, as Drew says, as code and containers and things like that. So that's kind of the evolution, and it's not everything all at once. I mean, obviously start small, grow it, but you know, the shameless plug for the Cloud Information Center, I would say, please take a look at that. All that kind of stuff is covered, or it tries to be. And it's updated constantly to stay relevant. And yeah, if you're looking at, oh, how can I procure cloud services and move forward that way, we do have those templates for you. So that's all I can say on that. Thanks.
Thank you. So we're nearing the end of our panel discussion. I want to ask each of our panelists before we end is, what is one major takeaway that you, have acknowledged through this COVID-19 era, but also, the importance of TIC 3.0 implementation with Zero Trust? What's just like one thing that you would really like, to share the audience as they adopt and continue on with their own journey in their agency? Maybe Trifina, you could start.
Yeah, sure. So the biggest thing is more philosophical, that as an architect or a leader in your agency, you need to have A to C thinking instead of A to B thinking. The architect and the leader really defines why we're doing this, what is the objective, and then you partner with your engineers to help, or with someone like Drew to help you implement the how. And that really can make the difference if you know exactly why and what you're trying to accomplish. And also read the TIC 3.0 guidebook.
That's great, thank you. And Justin?
Yeah, I would say a lot of what Trifina just said is very true. You can have the good ideas, but you got to line up the business behind it to make those changes. And I would say the remote access or remote user use case is going to be the launch pad toward more of a zero trust type environment. If you look at the traffic patterns in that, it's pretty much covering some of that already. But I would say you got to start small, you got to move forward. But we all realize it's difficult, especially when you're talking about that funding situation is a concern, being able to fund parallel networks at the same time. We hear that all the time, just so you know. But it's for us on the GSA side, we're actively trying to help agencies move forward through, there are different collateral we're posting. We have these modernization use cases up there on the web, on the EIS website. We're publishing more. The partnership we're doing with CISA to try to make sure that we stay in lockstep with the TIC 3.0 guidance and the continued evolution of wherever that goes. And as Sean showed, we have some future use cases, including EIS use case. We are making updates to the contract. We've made several. We added SD-WAN service last summer, cloud service provider connection last summer as a feature of basically MPLS or VPNS. The managed TIC service, and then the broadband internet service to complement the SD-WAN and some other things. Were just recent updates we've done, as well as some other policy and updates like that. But on our side, that's one of the things we're going to do is keep trying to work with the providers, keep trying to openly share with agencies, and just try to move everyone forward as much as we can.
Excellent, thank you. Andrew?
Yeah, I think it's going to sound simple, but I would say anybody venturing in on the journey, look at industry as your partner. Bring us in early. And one of the things that I'm very, very impressed with is just the rapid pace of innovations on a program like this that allow for new scenarios, right? So to Justin's point, the amount of stuff that's been added to make it easier to use a TIC 3.0 and deploy TIC 3.0 environment. For people who may be a little hesitant, no one has all the answers. So, if you find the right partners and you're honest with them about the objective and the business outcome you're seeking, even if it doesn't exist today through either contracting or technology, the industry, and then people like Justin are very much dedicated to making these things work. And so there's a really good partnership on the public and private side to deliver new emerging technologies and then quickly get those into vehicles that can be procured and deployed quickly as well. So, if you've been listening today and you're thinking that doesn't look anything like my agency and it's not the problem I'm facing at all, let us know, because I guarantee you will not be the only one that has the problem you have or the complexity you have. And sooner we solve it for one person, to Justin's point, and then document it, sooner we can solve it for the rest of the environment as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys. I think we wrapped that up so beautifully. I really appreciate your time. Oh, yes, go ahead. Someone's going to say something? Oh, never mind. Okay, I'm hearing things. So thank you so much to our panelists. I really appreciate the discussion today. Looking forward to future collaboration within our working groups as well. Up next, we are going to have our second panel of the day, which I also have the pleasure of moderating. So if our next panel could please come on. Bye, guys. Bye to our first panel and hello to our second panel. We're all about transitions over here. Okay, thanks, guys. So I would like to now introduce our panelists. If you could wave to the camera when I call your name. First up, we have Kevin Gallo. He is the Director of the Solutions Development Division over at USGA. And we also have Corey Sville, who is the Chief Cloud Infrastructure Architect at the Defense Information Systems Agency. Next panelist is Martin Stanley. He is the Branch Chief Strategic Technology, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. And last but not least, we have Jason Georgie, who is the Field Chief Technology Officer at Palo Alto Networks. So nice to see you all. Thank you for being here. Before we begin with the question and answer section, I just want to encourage the audience once again to please submit questions of your own in the Q&A section of this platform. We'll be going through them during and after this panel discussion, so please send them as we go. So to kick us off, I'm going to do the same thing as we did at the last panel, and I would just like to give each panelist the opportunity to further introduce themselves and share anything that they would like to with the audience as it relates to the topic that we are discussing today. First up, I would love to hear from Kevin.
All right, good afternoon. Thanks, Kirsten. And I'm in the GSA's Office of Enterprise Technology Solutions, the Federal Acquisition Service. And, largest focus right now for me and the team is on assisting agencies move to the Enterprise Infrastructure Solutions or EIS contracts. As some of you may know, virtually every federal government department and agency right now is transitioning their telecom and many other enterprise networking services to EIS. And EIS will be one of the contract vehicles, agencies will be leveraging for solutions that were discussed in the last panel and on this panel. It really is a catalyst for modernization. In addition to EIS, we also assist industry and agencies with the Managed Mobility Program and contracts. And again, that's one that's relevant to this panel's topic. And we continue to partner tightly with CISA regarding TIC 3.0, a big part of the outreach efforts, and also with the documentation. We've added new services to EIS over the past year or so to help agencies modernize and innovate, as they increasingly rely upon the cloud-based resources in the mobile workforce. The first of these additions was the cloud service provider connection that was added to the virtual private network service. And it's to allow the secure connection from an agency location to the cloud infrastructure. Last year, we added the managed SD-WAN service, and it's designed to accommodate the different approaches for the overlays and underlays, and also, the increasing use of the internet and broadband services. And most recently, we added a couple of new services to EIS. There's the new broadband internet service for, that's a lower cost network transport option for agencies, and the trusted internet connections service. I mean, that's for the networking solutions with the built-in security. It maps to the agency requirements and CISA's TIC 3.0 guidance. And that's part of the EIS Managed Security Services suite. And along with most of these, we've developed a variety of guides, solicitation templates, and other items for these. For those of you who are listening to the last panel, Justin Morgan there, he's on point for a lot of these activities here for the guidance and working with agencies. Regarding things coming up ahead, of course, we're continuing to work with agencies. If anything, this is really this is heating up. We're developing some guidance for the TIC 3.0 remote user use case, and particularly relevant to the Sassy topic. Also includes aspects of zero trust network access, and had, as Justin would say, it's kind of a launch pad into zero trust. We're involved with developing a zero trust architecture handbook that'll map to the product, service, and solution sets available via our contracts. And by our contracts, I mean not just EIS and managed mobility, but also the schedules and other contracts like the HACs there. And we've seen some of the work being done by ATARC's zero trust architecture, networking subgroup, and there's some great work there. And also on our planning roadmap is, we haven't started this yet, but this is where we're going, is a Sassy overview and ordering guide for EIS, the managed mobility program. We've developed a fairly comprehensive one for SD-WAN, and right now we're working on one for networking as a service. So,
you guys must be bored over there, huh? No, that's great. And a lot of what you brought up are things that we're going to be discussing during the panel today. So that's an awesome segue. Next up, I would like to hear from Corey, please.
Thank you. So hi, my name is Corey Sville. I'm the Chief Cloud Infrastructure Architect for the Cloud Computing Program Office, or CCPO as we're known. We are part of the Defense Information Systems Agency, which is the combat support agency for enterprise IT across the Department of Defense. But here at CCPO, we are just a team of technologists and acquisition professionals that are really focused on transforming cloud for the warfighter. So our office really prioritizes building enduring products and processes that address the warfighter's most critical concerns and the challenges that they're experiencing in the field. So some of the things that we're working on that kind of tied both to the warfighter's needs as well as to the trusted internet connection model. So we have an infrastructure as code project, which is where we are working on building pre-configured and pre-authorized templates that rapidly build your environment within the cloud service provider, gives you a sort of trusted and approved model for deploying applications to the cloud, and speeds up your ability to adopt cloud within your architecture. Some other things we're working on is supporting an agency-wide effort looking into the next generation of our boundary and perimeter. So basically, how does the agency integrate systems that we have and mature those systems into using more of Sassy style products and trusted internet connection guidance to create a more holistic view and holistic security defense model for our agency. And then finally, we're also working on modernization of our on-premise networks to support better connectivity to those cloud service provider frameworks. So as commercial cloud is being more heavily utilized inside of the department, we want to be able to provide our agency as well as our mission partners with better, secure, faster access to those commercial cloud provider frameworks, so that they can then adopt those providers faster and have an easier path to migrate their systems from an on-premise data center architecture to a cloud supported architecture.
Excellent. Thank you. Very interesting stuff. Next, I'd like to hear from Martin.
Hello, how's everybody doing? My name is Martin Stanley. I am the branch chief for strategic technology at CISA, and I think there's a lot of discussion already today about what CISA does, so I'll let that stand. Obviously, in support of agencies moving to remote work, we've issued a number of guidance around TIC, and it sounds like there's been some conversations around that. Sean, I think, did a nice keynote this morning as well, highlighting those efforts. One of the things that maybe was not mentioned is in our CTO office, we actually have just released our strategic technology roadmap overview update. It's public, it's on our website. It lists the strategic technologies that we're forecasting, that we're either going to be interested in or going to be needing as part of our mission support. And within that are things like zero trust architectures and related capabilities to securing the edge. Also, with the funding that we recently received as part of the COVID relief legislation, we're modernizing our enterprise programs for the federal government. This is NCPS, Einstein, CDM, to ensure that we are, improving the capabilities that agencies have to secure their networks and their devices in whatever posture they happen to be. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. And Jason.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. I'm the field CTO, Jason Georgie, field CTO for Prisma Access and Sassy at Palo Alto Networks. So my role here at Palo is to talk to customers, prospective customers, various agencies, partners, whoever around really our approach to a secure access service edge. It's something that has definitely picked up some momentum since it was talked about early in August 2019. Obviously, something like COVID-19 accelerated a lot of the thought process that was behind why Sassy makes sense to any type of organization. And what I continue to see, it doesn't really matter what the organization happens to be or what industry they operate in. A lot of the needs are the same. It's around secure and reliable remote access that scales for mobile users and things like that, providing a more efficient WAN capability that puts users in more direct path to their applications and services, whether they're in the data center, cloud, SaaS, or web. Expanding security reach and posture, and just all in general, trying to understand where a secure access service edge makes sense. One thing that I see aligning to very security conscious organizations, such as government agencies, is third-party and contractor access to resources, where something like zero trust and zero trust network access becomes paramount to what organizations are trying to do to improve security, reduce just open-ended access to certain systems and things like that. So the biggest thing that we find is that there's a lot of options, and there's power behind what Sassy can do for an organization, but they're not all created equally. And understanding what some of those key differences are what's going to really set certain organizations and agencies up for success better than others will. So it's good to be participating on this panel with this group today.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. And for our viewers at home, if anything was mentioned that you would like to hear a little bit more about, make sure to use the Q&A section of this platform so that we can get your questions answered while we have our fabulous panelists here. But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and post our first poll question for the day. And again, just a reminder, you need to answer this in order to receive your CPE credits. But on a scale of 1 to 5, how important is Sassy to transforming the federal cloud space? And this has been mentioned quite a few times already. So before everyone go ahead and answer that, and then we'll post the results. But I do have a follow-on question for each of our panelists, and that is, what does Sassy mean to you? Let's start it out that way. Kevin, would you like to go first?
My gosh, I thought we were going to have someone, I was going to let Jason go to your general definition of Sassy here, and then because our perspective is probably a little bit different in kind of like the benefits and where Sassy and talking about convergence, but probably want to first just talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of Sassy, the networking functions, and then the security functions, and a little bit of the convergence, and then I can go ahead and talk about really some of the value and the significance of the convergence there.
All right, that works. Let's hear from Jason first on it then.
All right, well, that works for me too. So yeah, for those of you that secure access service edge is a new concept, it is a strategy and a framework. It is not a product. Now, certain organizations out there are doing the best they can to unify and converge, as Kevin was saying, networking and security services at a cloud delivered edge or something like that. But the idea is, where it all kind of started from was the migration of data and users out of a four walls, right? An on-premise type environment. So you've got users that are working from everywhere, home, on the go, in the branch or office, and they're accessing resources, and it doesn't matter where they are, data center, cloud, SaaS, or web. The idea of a Sassy is to connect those things together in as unified a way as possible. So that includes the connectivity part, like SD-WAN. Well, even taking a little bit of a step back, right? Especially when we were talking about TIC and the evolution of even 2.2 to 3 and things like that, where everything previously was about providing connectivity over a private network, right? Whether it's a LAN across a WAN to another LAN, or LAN to a LAN, whatever that is, to where users are sitting and data happens to reside. But now all of a sudden, right, the idea of being able to decentralize what we're trying to do and take advantage of the internet for a lot of these services has changed the game, right? Because the internet is not a controllable or private network in any way whatsoever. So Gartner kind of put it on us as the providers to say, all right, how do you best control transit through it and embed security with it so that your customers can take advantage of using the internet more for enterprise usage? And so that's what we do, right? So it's about providing that direct, efficient, secure connectivity and efficient usage between users and their resources, no matter where they happen to be, but delivering as a cloud service. So making sure that we eliminate the need for on-premises equipment as much as possible. And when we do have it, making it as light as possible. So a big concept that's going to be important to government agencies specifically is the idea of a thin branch, which is you abstract the heavy security processing, SSL decryption, sandboxing, DLP, and all of those things to a cloud delivered service, and let the branch on-prem equipment essentially just do some very basic security if necessary, maybe some cross VLAN inspection with threat protection or something like that, but then send everything else to the cloud to handle the security processing and things like that. So obviously you need a robust cloud to make that happen, and you need services running at scale to be able to do that. But that's the idea of a secure access service edge. I mean, I try to keep it as simple as possible. Users anywhere need access resources anywhere. How do we do that as securely and directly as possible?
I like that. Thank you. And then from the agency perspectives, now we can get into it. Kevin, would you like to kick us off?
Sure, I'll go and add in a little bit of what Jason's saying. So this past year, of course, we've seen a lot of really, transformative change, a lot of modernization happening there, drastic increase in teleworking and changing traffic patterns and zero trust is being, so important here to move in that direction. But I'm going to rewind the clock a little bit, let's step back a couple years. And even before all of these changes, we've seen the huge move towards cloud computing there, adoption of cloud computing along with increased mobility. And that's had a profound impact on telecommunications and cybersecurity needs. The traffic patterns is no longer the simple client server traffic patterns with static locations, predictable traffic volumes. You had unified communications, inelastic traffic demands, and high quality of service there. Mobile users with a diversity of endpoints, traffic going to a cloud, and not just one cloud provider, but multiple cloud providers. A hybrid architecture too, where there's cloud and also in our case agency data centers. So it's really changed the needs of the network. And if you look at the costs of operating an enterprise wide area network, you see bandwidth needs have been steadily increasing. Trends over 10 or so years. We've seen through our contracts, bandwidth needs going around 30% increase per year. The cost per megabit bandwidth's been going down, but that's only been going down, like 25% or so needs. So the net of this is, increasing wide area networking costs. So these are really the challenges that agencies and commercial enterprises have also been facing now for years, not just over this past year. And that's what's really grown a lot of the impetus to adopt a new approach for the WAN and software-defined wide area networking. So that's been the technology that's been at the center of modernization networks, which rapidly achieves the mainstream status. I was talking about that on the last panel a bit about SD-WAN, and it's been very, very pivotal. But to get the full benefits of SD-WAN, it also requires a new security architecture. And this is a lot of what the shift to TIC 3.0 is all about. Moving to a distributed network, so also moving away from the traditional moat and castle security perimeter, moving to a distributed security model with policy enforcement points anywhere in the network. So you have a shift in the network architecture, the adoption of the WAN, and it's requiring two coordinated efforts: the redesign of the WAN and the re-architecting of cybersecurity. So that's a lot of challenge there to manage those two. And kind of a lot of what the beauty of what Sassy does is it really converges those. You got the parallel journeys of the redesign of the WAN and the re-architecting of cybersecurity, and that's where the Sassy framework converges these. It's essentially the SD-WAN plus the security stack, along with integrated solutions there. And I hope you can't hear all the background noise I'm hearing right now. So it's one of the hazards of teleworking here. And the integrated solutions, and particularly applicable to the cloud and telework environments there. And in the Sassy converged solution, it can also improve security there, and efficiently extending the visibility and monitoring to the remote user.
Thanks, Kevin. And when you were talking about the background noise, I couldn't even tell if it was mine or yours because it's happening outside my window too. Martin, I'm gonna pass it over to you. What did you answer for the poll on a scale of 1 to 5? How important is Sassy to transforming the federal cloud space? And what is your perspective on what it means to you?
Well, I'm hoping I got it right. Well, I think it's very important. Jason made a couple of good points, as did Kevin as well. But we're looking at an entirely new way of delivering our services, and as a result, how we're going to secure them in our IT environments. And in fact, we probably should have always been thinking this way, but the plain fact of the matter is we used to think of things as very static, that they would never change, or that they would change very slowly. And the reality is now that we understand things are going to change very quickly. And as a result, we have to think of it in a way that we can actually manage it and still continue to offer all kinds of new services and support new devices and all that kind of thing. And so, to that end, I think the foremost thing that needs to be on people's mind when they think about this is, you're adopting an entirely new approach. That's the bad news. The good news is, in many ways, you're using a lot of the same tools and capabilities, just in a different way than you were using before. And so, not to get too overwhelmed, I think to Jason's point about, it's not a service, right? It's a set of tools and capabilities. It's something that we should be thinking about when we think about the secure access approaches. So, from my perspective, it's really a mentality, like how are we going to think about, evolving our environments, but also how are we going to prepare ourselves to continue to evolve as time goes on, needs change, and obviously the threats change.
Thank you. And then Corey, I'm going to pass it over to you also, but I'm going to tack on the question, how has Sassy helped transform securing federal cloud in your agency?
Sure. So actually, and it's funny, listening to the panel, we all have kind of the same, I think we're all on the same page with how important this really is to the department as a whole, and to the entire federal government as a whole. I'll start by just kind of talking about how this has transformed, securing, federal systems, government systems, things that, while they need to be accessible from people that aren't on site, they can't be accessible to everybody that's not, that doesn't have access to them. So it represents, to Jason's point and to the rest of the panel had mentioned this, but it's not tools, it's a mentality change, and really it's a change of the security paradigm. So DoD's has traditionally been very castle and moat defense, right? If you're on premise, you're behind the guns and guards. We trust that. And we trust that, you're sitting on the same site as our data centers are, or you're using our private connections to get to those data centers. Well, by bringing commercial cloud into the mix, we're essentially opening the doors to the castle, right? So the castle's defenses don't quite make as much sense. When you're using these outside services, you're using software as a service provided applications, you're using infrastructure that you don't necessarily own. You're spinning up resources on those. You have to adopt a different security model than you would if you were doing it all in-house. So we're moving, I think, more from a network-driven defense model, which really only focuses on where you're coming from, to a data-driven defense model, which focuses on so much more. It's not just where you're coming from, it's who are you? what is the security posture of the device you're on? How are you authenticating? Are you just giving me a username and password? Are you giving me a certificate? Are you giving me some form of attributable authentication that I can use to determine what level of access you should have? And then we're taking all that data, combining it, and allowing our defenders to not just be boundary defenders, to not just be network defenders, to not just be host defenders, but to just be defenders. They're defending everything sort of all at once, and they have a very holistic picture of what the security of the organization looks like. Your second question, and I just want to make sure I'm right, you had asked, you throw out your second question real quick.
Yeah, how has Sassy helped transform securing the federal cloud?
Yeah, so I think this really, COVID taught us a lot, I think, and I think it highlighted some concern areas. For example, it's very difficult to bring all of your users on-prem when they're not on-prem, right? Because you're going to force them to go through a particular device that's going to make them look like they're on-premise. That device can fail, that device can become overloaded. And now you're putting a lot of work on your data centers to bring users on-prem to have them just go off-prem again to get the resource that they're looking for. So it's taught us that we have to change the way we look at defense and stop thinking so much about bringing everybody back on-prem behind the guns and guards so that we can implicitly trust that, and move towards sort of the assumed breach model, right? Or the this trusted internet model where we're going to move past just network and we're going to defend this in a better way. We're going to use more data-driven, we're going to use more analytics to determine who should have access to what and how we should grant that access going forward. I think it's also taught us that we have to be flexible in everything, in our policy process, in our accreditation process, in our technological evolution process, because we have to be able to scale rapidly. I think the department has done a very good job of responding to this sort of unprecedented environment, this unprecedented time, and be able to not only continue to maintain the security of what we have, but to implement enhancements to allow our users to more easily access those resources when they can't be on site with each other.
Excellent, thank you. We had another audience question come in while we were discussing. So Donna Miller would like to know, moving everything to the cloud, such as data and applications, can affect application performance for user and citizen experience, and the increased costs of aggressing data make Edge more palatable. How can the two work together? Jason, do you have any insights into this?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a question across the board. It kind of like how I opened this up and said a lot of industries and things like that are facing the same set of challenges. This is no different. And there is a balance between user experience and applying security, so not degrading user experience for the sake of it, but also, how do I best take advantage of things like edge computing and things like that without, causing additional or opening up additional risk and things like that. And that all depends on the SASE that you decide to go with. And because they're not all created equal, some have the ability to scale better than others. So you want to find something that has the ability to scale with you and your needs without compromising security. And by that, I mean, not something that just provides remote access, but then also a split tunnel VPN or something like that to send certain traffic off direct, bypassing the security capability or the remote access capability itself. So it's a matter of just making sure that, you have something that absorbs all the traffic, can inspect and apply policy to all of it at scale without degrading performance. So when you want to talk about using edge services more, it's all about making sure you have the right complementary technology to it, but also integrating something like digital experience management. So from the IT side of the house, where we say, okay, we're going to move these services out to cloud and SaaS, our internal consumers, so that the end user needs to be able to, have the performance we expect or that we're promising by finally moving to these types of services. there are tools out there that provide digital experience management that looks at the endpoint through each segment of the connection to that cloud or SaaS destination. So you can start to see where performance issues are and things like that. For the consumer side, the citizen side, the consumer of the government services, obviously that winds up being, an environment that needs highly scalable web application firewalling and things like that, that make sure that you have, again, the same level of security that you've expected by having, borders and gateways around your services that sat on-prem. You now move them to the cloud. Those customer-facing VPCs and things like that need to make sure that they're applying the same level of application security as was on-prem. So it's all about making sure you're mix and matching the right technology, the right policy, and doing it at scale.
Thank you. And, kind of just going off of that, so what happens when these apps are not geared towards the cloud? And I assume there's some costs associated with that. Does anyone on the panel have experience facing those challenges within their own agency? Corey just came off mute.
Yeah, so I could talk a little bit about that. So one of the things that I think our mission partners had started to realize is that the lift and shift model of taking your on-premise application and as is moving it to the cloud is either cost prohibitive or impossible due to the way that the applications are built. So a common misconception, I think, is that when you move an application to the cloud, you can just pick it up and move it from off-prem or from on-premise to the cloud, and everything's great. You're going to lower your costs, lower your resources, everything's going to be wonderful. Sometimes that's not the case, right? So applications may rely on an on-premise system that you just can't emulate in the cloud, or that application may not be cloud optimized, if you will. So moving an infrastructure as a service system, especially just on-prem and moving it to the cloud, can really almost increase your cost depending on how you do it. So, some of the things that our office has been working on is getting a pathway for customers to go from an infrastructure as a service design system to a platform as a service design system. So migrating your databases from a third-party database system to a platform as a service hosted database system. Moving an on-premise collaboration platform to a cloud hosted collaboration platform, and trying to get these applications in more of a cloud centric design as opposed to the way that they are on-prem today. And so with that comes the ability to create your infrastructure as code, as opposed to having to build it all manually and have these big large resources moving across, and as well as creating some pathway for accreditation, right? Because this is, again, is a little bit of untouched territory of having to now authorize those platform as a service devices to be used. So I think there's a path forward for that. It really goes toward not just lifting and shifting your applications, but refactoring your applications as they move to the cloud into more of a cloud-centric model. And that can either be at the time you migrate them, or it may be sort of a brownfield, greenfield deployment where you move your infrastructure on-prem over to the cloud, run it for a time while you are refactoring your architecture to be more cloud-centric and cutting over to a new model at some point in the future.
Excellent, thank you.
And if I could just jump in on this one too, just to add to what Corey and Jason are saying, and great points there. So thinking about where you want your data to reside and where it makes sense for the data to reside, depending upon the specific application. That's one thing to consider. That is Sassy. What's one of the beauties of it is it can support different different architectures or data in different locations, whether it's in the cloud or multi-cloud environments, or if it's more at the edge, and how it can also improve the performance and permit more data being at the edge. Because one of the use cases I think where Sassy is going to be particularly valuable is where you're talking about Internet of Things, where you have multiple endpoints there, and there sometimes may have very latency sensitive applications, and sort of the authentication there and user management of that, not wanting to have to backhaul all that traffic or telemetry or centralized, whereas with the Sassy deployment, it actually moves that and that data and the visibility and the monitoring actually closer to the edge, and that can improve your performance.
Awesome, thank you. So I think it is time for our next poll question. Alyssa, if you could please pop that up on the screen. The poll question is, how far along do you see your agency's IT modernization in terms of implementing TIC 3.0 guidance? And your options are very far, slightly far, we have begun, we have not started, or you have no clue. So take a moment and please answer that. If you'd like to get your CPE credits today, make sure that you answer that. And then I would like to hear from Martin next. I have a question for you, Martin, and it relates to the poll question. How far along do you see your agency IT modernization in terms of implementing the TIC 3.0 guidance? What are your thoughts around that?
Sure. So obviously we wrote the TIC 3.0 guidance. So, our agency has been at the forefront of this. As far as our internal operations goes, I think we talked about this on a panel a couple of weeks ago, but it's interesting. When I scroll back to about 13 months ago, I was getting phone calls from folks at various agencies, people I hadn't heard from in years, and they were asking if there was any way to determine like how much capacity their VPN could handle, because they were preparing to go into this, full telework thing, and they had no idea what was going to happen. And, I think we've gone, as a federal enterprise from that kind of posture where we were so centered around the office, in a very, short time for government, into a position where, folks are pretty comfortable. There's been lots and lots of different kinds of updates that agency IT staff have done, whether it's enable Teams or Zoom or, what have you, different kinds of capabilities that maybe folks weren't taking advantage of before. Cameras, we would have never used cameras before, all kinds of peripherals. But, we still have the same, kinds of issues that we've had in the past as well, where you've got to be very concerned about, the security of peripherals and things like that as you're adding them into, enterprise IT devices. So, from that perspective, I think we've done very, very, very well. I also think that we've done a very nice job culturally of getting folks to, be able to adopt these tools and capabilities. And I'm hoping that that's going to promote this awareness and this, this furtherance of, these kinds of capabilities and tools and, being in the environment, as opposed to going back to, maybe more of a secure perimeter approach. But I'll go back to what I said before, and something I really, would want to emphasize in these kinds of environments. I think our IT professionals and our organizations in general are being measured not only, in how well they've been able to adapt and, respond to this particular challenge, but how they're able to handle the rapid, transition of all kinds of technologies and the capabilities that are going to result. We're looking at digital twin technology, as something that is a potential that, something that we might want to look at further. And again, as you decompose and deconstruct that capability in and of itself, it's actually a bunch of things. It's AI, it's VR, and it's all these other, kinds of things that you're going to see brought into the environment that, really aren't there already, or would, necessitate it if you wanted to adopt it. And so I think it's a way we're going to have to think about things going forward, that there isn't a finish line, but that the pace is going to continue to accelerate, and we're going to have to learn how to operate, in that, and, in that kind of tempo and that kind of pace.
Thank you. And just to clarify for folks at home who don't know that term yet, digital twin technology, you're saying that is the AI and VR technology?
Well, so digital twins, we look at all kinds of different, technologies. And if you look at our strategic technology roadmap overview, it's a methodical way that we go about looking at strategic technology to determine if they're something that our agency would adopt. And when I talk about something like that, and I'll explain what it is, that's something that's in this speculation, category. It's something that we recognize it's a new technology that's out there. Folks are using it for different kinds of things, and we're trying to determine, based on the requirements that our programs have, because everything that we look at and that we spec out is based on the requirements that our programs have for meeting mission. So it may or may not fall into that category, but just something that I've been looking at recently. And digital twins, in fact, are a virtual representation of something that's in the world physically. So, for example, I've got a good friend who is a structural engineer, and they actually use drones to go out and do bridge inspections now, where there used to be people hanging over the side in harnesses, taking pictures, with cameras. And so, if we think about it, and we think about the kinds of processes that go on in whatever agency we happen to be in or business we happen to be in, wow, that's like transformative. When you think about that, when you think about that, people are modeling, their assembly lines, or their manufacturing, in these virtual environments, so they can optimize them and they can make them, better, safer, faster, cheaper, on and on and on and on and on, right? And I bring this up only to get folks to think about the kinds of transformations that we might see. We're just really scratching the surface, and they're going to happen fast. It's not like going from cassettes to DVDs.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for clarifying. So back to our poll question, it looked like most people had answered that they were implementing the TIC 3.0 guidance within their agency, but they have a lot of work to do. So I have to wonder, what are some of those challenges perhaps that they've been facing with that implementation? And maybe Kevin, do you have any insight as far as the challenges that your own agency has been challenged with?
Yeah, well, I really do two perspectives. One is I'm a user of GSA's IT resources, and we really shifted pretty seamlessly here to the pandemic environment here, because we'd already been teleworking a fair amount beforehand, and being able to adopt some aspects of what would be a TIC 3.0. We have the traditional VPN into our data centers for remote work, but also have split tunneling and zero trust network access to cloud resources. So in one sense, it's already been moving in a TIC 3.0 direction. So that's and there's more planned, along with transformation and adoption of SD-WAN for the enterprise network. As far as other agencies, some are further along than others. And that's obviously to be expected. There's still, I think, a sense of safety and need for the traditional TIC use case. We have the MTIP service, Managed Trusted Internet Protocol service, was created, in partnership with CISA for, at the earlier days of the trusted internet connection, and it's continued to evolve. For that, it's on networks, and MTIPS is on EIS as one of the services, and dozens of agencies use MTIP service and are transitioning their services over to MTIP. So there's still a need for that. I think that there's sort of a package solution idea with already gone through the security reviews of that, having an ATO in place for that, and that's so the simplicity and perceived safety of that. And now, though, I think it's a big lift to go beyond that and look, okay, well, the data, the locations are changing. That's for, we need to expand the security architecture. So it's, for the security teams in particular, there's a lot of a review and being able to assess the risks and move in that direction. I think that's the challenges here for agencies.
And Jason, as our industry representative on this panel, what are some of the things that these agencies have come to you guys with as it pertains to their approach or their implementation of TIC 3.0? From your perspective, what are some of the challenges associated?
Sure. Well, I think for a long time so let's even look at where the industry that I focus in on has gone and evolved over the last 12 years or so. There's been cloud delivered security for a long time, whether it's, I won't name vendors, but I'll name architectures, whether it's cloud proxies, whether it's some type of cloud delivered remote access solution, something that's able to help both the remote user aspect, but then also direct internet access from branch locations and things like that to help open up, decentralized egress. The reality is, though, that most of the options out there until the last, maybe few years or so have just not quite been secure enough, right? When organizations think about the security policies and the posture that they have, so they built layer 7 access between users and applications, and then from there, what they want to inspect as far as application traffic and things like that for threats and embedded data loss, what's capable of doing that. And the reality is, for a long time, most solutions have not been able to do a whole lot with everything, right? Web proxies are really good at handling web security and even some DNS to some extent, or FTP, but there's a whole lot more to our internet traffic than those three applications and protocols. On the remote user side, right? Okay, you've got a cloud delivered security solution or a cloud delivered remote access solution that does a nice job of, expanding scale for remote users, but there's no inspection for application inspection in line for threats and data loss. And that's prevalent throughout the software defined perimeter capability. So what do we do now? So the challenges I keep hearing are, how do we do this and adopt this in a way that doesn't degrade our security posture, right? And doesn't sacrifice security that we've already that we're trusting now with what is on-prem. Because as was stated, I mean, it is a move. It's a big move to say, we're going to now move from centralized with all this inspection zone capability to decentralized. And where does that inspection actually then go? Do we have the same level or not? So there is a comfort in a way of staying with what we already know in the policies and that we've built in the posture that we're comfortable with. So now it's a matter of finding that right Sassy that is able to do full inspection of all application port and protocol traffic, apply the same user to application based policy, but doing that inspection for embedded threats and data loss and whatever else. So now finally, and I'll just speak for my own platform here at Palo Alto Networks, Prisma Access, our Prisma Sassy capability is firewall based. It's not proxy based. So with that, there are no limitations in protocols and stuff like that as far as what we can inspect. So this has been very intriguing to a lot of the government agencies that were like, now we kind of need a firewall, right? We can't we can't replace a firewall with a proxy. We can do a proxy, but then we need supplemental firewalls too. Having a single firewall that can do everything that a web proxy is doing for them, plus the application gateway functionality and things like that, is what's resonating. And the ability to then take zero trust one step further, zero trust network access, to say, it's not just user to application based policy access. It's now, once that access is established, are we looking at that application traffic for the embedded threats and data loss? And with us, instead of a software defined perimeter, the answer is yes. So these are some of the challenges that, not only making the move to Sassy and through TIC 3.0, taking advantage of it, but making the move without sacrificing security is possible.
Thank you for sharing that. So we had an interesting audience question came in that kind of got me thinking too. What do you say about folks who are not necessarily understanding exactly what it is that the TIC 3.0 volumes entail, or just anything that has to do with more of an educational aspect to letting people really know what it is that they need to do. Have you guys thought about that within your own agency as a way of training or education, or bringing in maybe a TIC 3.0 expert or something like that?
Well, on the last panel, you heard Justin. Justin Morgan was one of the panelists, and a few other people on our team. I mean, we're always happy to work with the agencies that we're working with to go and kind of in a deep dive and talk through things and how it would change their network architecture, and changes there, and how they implement for that. So it's that's because there is a wealth of information out there. I guess some people, I mean, in some sense, almost too much, and being able to go through this and sort the golden nuggets. I think ATARC's done a great job, with some of the what you've put out there. Also, some of the in working with the working groups, and it's not the simplest concept. I mean, you're not going to be an expert in an hour, but there's certainly, and of course, industry out there. I mean, there's enough people willing to go and that deeper dive and talk through it.
So definitely being willing to collaborate and work together across all agencies, which is the purpose of ATARC. So glad that we're all here. Excellent. Any other thoughts before we continue on about challenges from our panelists?
Well, so I would say one thing, and I'm watching these questions from Angel, and they're great. But if you run a security program or you're rolling out a new initiative, whatever it happens to be, communication is really important. And I think some of those questions that I saw going by, this is really part of it. You can get mired down in jargon, and we see it all the time. We even see it sometimes when our leaders are talking to Congress. We have to also remember that there are folks that just want these devices to work and they want to use them and they enable their mission. And I want to encourage folks that spend a lot of time in the weeds to also think about how they're communicating that to the stakeholders, the folks that are actually using the technology, because it is a real challenge sometimes when you're so excited or you're so focused on getting one particular thing done, to lose track of the fact that not everyone has the time or the interest to be down in the weeds, and it needs to be clear to them what this means to them, how they're going to change, what capabilities are now enabled for them, and to be very, very conscious of the way that you're communicating that.
Excellent, thank you. And we're going to slip in our next poll question, or our last poll question, so we can all get our CPU credits. Alyssa, if you could please put that up. I normally text her that I'm about to ask her, so I apologize if there's a slight delay. She's fast though, here we go. So if our audience and our panelists could please answer, what do you see as major enablers of and barriers to successfully implementing cloud security tools and technology at your agency? And the options include verifying users' identity, validating devices, limiting privilege access, evaluating remote access, or you are unsure because you have not implemented it yet. So go ahead and take a moment and please answer the poll, and then we can jump into it with technology. And maybe we'll go ahead and see the results whenever it's ready to be posted, Alyssa, just so we have an idea. Okay, it looks like for the most part, people are saying verifying users' identity. Interesting. Any of our panelists want to jump in, and does that resonate with you all, or was that what you wrote as well? Corey, I see you just came off mute.
Yeah, so I think validating the user identities is a really big part of the TIC 3.0 guidance, and honestly just the security in general, right? That zero trust architecture, basically changing the way that we identify someone coming into the environment, and then centralizing it, right? Like today, where you're coming from is checked by a firewall, and the application itself does your authorization, and then there's another secure, there's a host-based system that's checking the security posture of your device, right? Creating a system that collaborates with each other and basically informs all of those data points into a central system that can then make a determination based on all those factors is really, really important. I think that's a really big, advantage of this framework as a whole. So some things that I think that, because in this one I actually answered other, and some of the things that I think enable this is the use of the cloud native tools. A lot of the cloud native, the cloud service providers have created these TIC 3.0 kind of quick start guides, right? Or these quick start systems that can get you off the ground faster to get you on your way to being, meeting that TIC 3.0 thought process. But in addition to that is connecting those systems and that data and combining that with your data that's on premise already. So, kind of putting everything together and centralizing it, I think is the biggest enabler for getting to the TIC framework as quickly as possible. But the barriers I think that are in place for this is that the policy side has not caught up. I think that, these things have changed so fast. I mean, we saw what in just a year happened to the landscape of how we view everything, how we view technology, how we view security, how we view, user experience. In just that short year, everything changed. So the policy side, I don't think has had the chance to catch up yet. There's a lot of different efforts already underway to allow those policies to catch up, to reevaluate how things are being secured and implemented. But I think that is right now one of the barriers to moving forward. But I think that barrier is being overcome. I think that the other barrier really is, for lack of better terms, and it goes back to the education topic that we had talked about before, is a lot of folks don't understand this. And they don't understand what TIC is all about. They don't understand what, it's not that they may not understand what TIC is from a thought process perspective, but how do we actually make this happen, right? Like what is the actual, what do I deploy? What do I buy? What do I implement? What do I tell my people to do to make this thing work? And I think that's, the market has a lot of products out there today that are, saying that we are a Sassy, or we are, built on a Sassy framework. But really it's just getting an idea of, from mission partners, from, internal in your agency, from industry as a whole, what is the best way forward to make this work? And what solutions are enduring? Because I think one of the fears and some of the things that may hold people back is they want to move forward, they want to do this, but it's a newer concept, and with newer concepts, you get iterative development of that concept, right? So if you deploy your Sassy environment now, in 2 years, it's going to look completely different. And if you're investing in this solution, that can be a difficult pill to swallow. But I think that you almost have to, it has to be that way, right? We can't survive, I think, on these solutions that are in place and we never change them. I think Jason, that was your point from earlier, or one of the other panelists, where we can't survive on being the same for 10 to 15 to 20 years. Like we have to evolve with the technology, and so I think that's another barrier, is just education and understanding that this may be an iterative solution. You may have to do multiple steps and stages to get you to this final destination.
Excellent, thank you. Any of our other panelists, do you guys agree with Corey, or do you feel differently about that?
I can throw in a thought or two there. And then I see Kevin wants to interject too, so I'll definitely leave him plenty of time for this. But the polling question plays right into zero trust, right? Zero trust network access. And we think about what that should mean to a lot of organizations, and where do you start? It's really about the Kipling method, right? Who, what, where, how, when, what, things like what time. So when getting identity right is something that we all have to do. That is the foundation of moving forward in the cloud environment. And the good thing about cloud and SaaS and things like that, in many cases, it forces you to do something with identity, right? Because everything's tied in with SAML to an SSO or something like that. So, it forces a bit of identity to happen. But then what do you do with it? So it's the who, right? So that we've got identity, but then part of that who is the device posture itself, right? Controlling the device, making sure that only devices meeting certain criteria are able to access certain resources. Or in the situation of a BYO device, the access is adaptive. So, okay, we still have access to certain applications, but we've got read-only access, or we can't upload, or we can't download to those applications. But, through our web top, our SSO, we can do certain things, but not everything. And then what are the conditions, right? Again, agency issued device, managed device versus BYO device at certain times in certain countries, right? Some of these agencies If I'm on vacation, I take my laptop with me. There's certain things I can't do. I shouldn't be able to do if I'm vacationing somewhere, right? Just don't allow it to happen because because it's too easy to have compromise, right? We talk about the inevitability of user credential theft or compromise and things like that. So we can mitigate some of that just by applying certain rules to what happens when and how and things like that. So there's a big element to that. So zero trust, in order to really implement that properly or to start going down that path, is to get identity right, understanding device posture. So what are the traffic flows and from who and what conditions to access certain things. But then on the Sassy side in general, so that, that's not a barrier. It can be an enabler. Now it's something to do. So it could be an initial barrier, but we have to get there. So it's something we just have to do. But then when it comes to an enabler, right? And I think that Corey was hitting on this a little bit and it made a lot of sense, was the idea of a Sassy, but that idea is meant to be more future proof, right? So yes, what you use of it will evolve over the next 3 to 5 years, but the platform itself should be consistent. And that's what we're trying to deliver to our customers, is a platform that is modular and that it doesn't have to be fully dependent on everything else to work. You use what you need out of it, but that platform will evolve as well, so that it is the same platform that you're now using and consuming other services from as they roll out. So agencies and any organization can feel more confident in that, all right, cool, I'm going to invest in this platform now, and that's going to be there when I need it, for the next 3 to 5 years, because it's just going to evolve with me. So that's what we at Palo 2 are trying to do with our Sassy.
Excellent, thank you. And then Kevin?
Yeah, no, the comments were really right on there. And I also picked other for that one, thinking policy is often the challenge there. Unfortunately, it's not so much a government-wide policy barrier anymore with TIC 3.0. It's a lot of how the agency implements TIC 3.0 and the security policies. So that's right on. And then talking about the investment too. It's not the investment though, like you're buying a physical router or a device-based on-premise firewall, where you're gonna, you actually gonna have that there for 5-10 years and everything like that. So that's one of the beauties of the Sassy framework. I mean, it's inherently designed for tools and services to be delivered as a service. So that helps with the investment piece. And I think that's what Jason was alluding to there in that comment. So that's just those are the other 2 points I wanted to make there.
Thank you. It's excellent. So before we run out of time, I want to make sure we get through our audience question. Stefan asks, do you see agencies converging toward a single identity manager provider in the cloud or CSP? If so, can you mention which one or leaders? Corey?
Yeah, so I wanted to touch on this because this is actually one of the things that our office is working on specifically. So our office put out an application called Global Directory, which is exactly what you're talking about here. It is a single identity source for the department. So this was built, because we saw the need. We saw an issue with providing an identity source specifically right now for Office 365, but even moving forward into other things. So we, our office in conjunction with a lot of other folks across the department built a completely in the cloud solution for centralized identity management, which we call Global Directory.
Excellent, thank you. So before we wrap up our panel, we have just a few minutes left. I would like to go around and have each panelist leave our audience with something that you would like them to take away from this panel discussion of the utmost importance. And it can be anything. It can be a book, it can be a movie, it can be a drink. I don't care what it is. Maybe it's a guidance, maybe it's just some advice that you have for them as they go out on their journey implementing all of this and bringing it back to their own agency to improve our federal government. What would that be? And can you kick us off by sharing, Martin, please?
I had something to say that was interesting, and I think I just forgot it. But no. So, I think if there's one thought, and to kind of wrap this up, what whether it's Sassy or it's Zero Trust or whether it's, you know, the NIST cybersecurity framework or whatever it happens to be, you know, these collections of controls, you know, are often very similar or the same controls, and they're used to perform particular objectives. And I think folks oftentimes when they get into implementing, you know, whatever happens to be that, you know, that general, you know, concept is lost. And the way that you go about implementing these controls makes all the difference in the world as to whether or not you're going to meet your security objectives. So, you know, it's not a question of, you know, buying every single, you know, security control on the list and installing them and, you know, checking the box and being done. You got to know that they're actually working. You have to know that they're meeting the needs of the users. You have to know that you're actually talking to the users, which just seems like a basic thing, but oftentimes, you know, we you know, talk past our user community. So I think it's very important, you know, just to restate that these are great guides and architectures for putting in place, you know, really important capabilities, but there's a lot of, you know, work in the details, and, you know, you shouldn't underestimate that, and you should pay attention to what you're doing.
Excellent, thank you. Kevin, what would you like to leave our audience with?
Well, happy Morse code day. Yes, that actually is today. So we've came a long way from the beginning of Morse code. I do not remember those days. And of course, there's really no end to this modernization journey here. It's continuous. And you know, among the many lessons of the past year has been the importance of agility for enterprise networking. You know, flexibility and agility critically important, you know, as is the overall business resilience. Use of cloud, you know, cloud delivered services adds to this flexibility and resilience. And security, you know, critically important. It doesn't always necessarily mean buying more devices, software, services, and adding in more layers. I mean, be thinking, simplify when you can, you know, convergence, integrated solutions, delayering. I mean, there's enough complexity. One of the beauties of the Sassy framework there is it does provide that convergence. You know, consider managed services and as a and moving to an as a service model for networking needs also. That enables that continuous modernization.
Thank you. Corey, you're next.
I'm going to apologize to Kevin up front for sounding like your echo, but I think that statement is so important. Continuous modernization, right? The age-old adage of adapt or die, right? This is we are in such an evolving landscape that we can't be afraid to change. We can't be afraid to ask questions about processes and procedures that have been in place for however long they've been there. You know, I think now is the time to challenge everything we've done and ask ourselves, is this the right way, or do we need to move away from this or move forward, or, with new information, reserve the right to change my mind, right? It's that kind of thing. So we may set a course and new information is added that makes us think that that course is not right, but we can't be afraid to change just because there's something that says we can't do this right now, or it's too hard, it's too cost prohibitive, it's whatever the case may be. I think everything has to be entertained, and we have to look at the pros and cons of each solution until we find the right one. Because I think if we're afraid to iterate, if we're afraid to fail fast, if we're afraid to try and to implement things that we may have to go back and refactor, we're never going to get out of the situations that we might be in today. So, the biggest thing, my takeaway from reading all the TIC guidance, with looking at how, COVID has impacted everything as a whole, is we have to change. We have to adapt to the situation, or we're not going to make it moving forward.
Love it. And Jason, your turn to inspire us all.
All right. I think a lot of the words to the wise here have already been spoken, but you do have to evolve. Don't be afraid. Now, with that being said, the right Sassy is going to help you on that journey. It's going to enable you to do things confidently and securely by making sure that there's no compromises in what you're doing. So it's not like a big risk, right? Oh, if I go from this direction to that direction, am I willing to accept the new risk that direction entails? If you can make the same move, enable the same objectives of improving user experience, expanding security reach and coverage, and those types of things, providing a more direct path between users and their services in a secure way, in the most secure way possible, that's going to alleviate a lot of that concern and let you do this with the confidence that you need to really do this, or to push it forward as fast as you need to. Failing fast is something that I think everybody needs to embrace. You can't just assume, continuous success. You want sustained success, but you are going to have to fail at times to realize that, and making sure that you have the right partners at your side when you go through these journeys is what's going to help you get there and do it as quickly as possible.
Amen. Love it. Thank you all. We've had 2 incredible back-to-back panels. It's been such a pleasure to be a part of this conversation. And unfortunately, that is all the time we have today. So thank you again to our panelists for such great insight and fun information. Thanks for everyone who joined us today. And I would like to also thank our partners again at Palo Alto for helping us put on such an excellent summit. Up next, ATARC will be hosting a webinar on Thursday, April 29th. So please join us there for this information sharing event focused on the many ways in which government agencies can benefit from artificial intelligence operations. This panel of government leaders and topic experts will discuss the importance of AI ops and how it is changing the way in which agencies operate. You'll get to hear firsthand how these thought leaders are working to reduce costs, increase output, replace manual tasks with automation, and optimize the capacity of their workforce through AI ops. So we really look forward to seeing you guys at the event, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day. Bye.